Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to attempt to do something that I hope will be entertaining, but will also be difficult for me to do. I'm going to try to choose between my children and give you my top 5 favorite phones of all time. Now, I must stress, this top 5 list is in no particular order, because getting it down to 5 was hard enough. Actually ranking them 1 through 5 was going to be really difficult, and a lot of it was going to be arbitrary, and my mind would probably change day to day as I thought about this longer and longer. So again, top 5, no particular order. We're also going to go over a handful of honorable mentions as well, devices that were oh so close to making it into that list, or depending on the day, might have made it into that list as well. With all that being said, let's take a look at my top 5 favorite phones of all time. For phone number 1, was there really any question where we were going to start? This is Microsoft's Surface Duo in particular. This is Surface Duo 2. Now, for many people, this will be a very strange phone or device to have in a list of top 5 favorite phones of all time, because a lot of people have only heard really negative things about this device. However, for some people, and I am one of them, this device is nearly perfect. I'm the type of person that is always doing 2 things at the same time. I'm always jumping back and forth between 2 tasks. And because of that, this thing just makes so much sense to my brain. Just the way that apps can flow on this thing. So I'm in Feedly. Let's open up a news article. Guess what? Feedly doesn't go anywhere. The news article just opens up on the other screen. Let's say then I want to take some notes about that article. I can simply go home and open up my note-taking application. I can then grab some text off of that article and then drag it over to my note-taking application. There's just such a synergistic sort of flow to this device. Now, it is not without its own problems and issues. For a lot of people, it was buggier than it should have been. It's not the easiest device to use one-handed, even when you're in phone mode. It's just a really large device. The camera wasn't the best in the world. While I do think, in particular, using a Gcam port, it was a lot better than people thought it was, it still wasn't the greatest camera around, and for the price, you might expect more. And of course, the software updates just haven't been there. We've not gotten past Android 12 or 12L to be specific. So, lots of problems, but for me, this is a device that will always be fondly remembered. It's one of my favorite phones of all time. No question, this had to be included. For phone number 2, we're going way back in time, guys. This is the Moto X. This was a device that I absolutely adored. I wish I still had my original one, even though the back of mine was really messed up and scratched and cracked and it had yellowed because I used that thing for so long. This is one that I actually purchased very recently off of eBay just to kind of have this thing back in my possession. Again, this thing did so many interesting things, as you just saw there. The always on display. I don't know if anyone had it before this device. I may be wrong, but it was one of the very, very first. What about this kind of functionality? Okay, now, what's the forecast for today? Again, I don't know if this was the first, but it was one of the first to be able to do that. The twist gesture to launch your camera was another really interesting feature that I found myself using all the time to quickly get into that. I don't know why these things went away. Maybe phones got so big we didn't feel like we had a firm enough grip on them to be able to do that. I also really loved the little dimple on the back. My finger just kind of instinctively went there, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a grip to hold on to. The battery life was great. The screen was great. This was just such a cool phone back in the day. It felt like a pure Google experience, and I held on to this thing for a long time because of that. Of course, today, it is definitely showing its age. Android looks much better now than it did all these years ago. But man, I can just remember at the time feeling like this thing was absolutely fantastic. For number 3, we're taking a diversion again back in time. This is a phone that I've talked about on this channel. I made a full video about this device. This is the original Palm Pre. And I still think this phone looks absolutely fantastic. Of course, it has that full QWERTY keyboard, and WebOS is the main feature for me. This operating system was so far ahead of its time in regard to its ability to jump between tasks, to multitask. Yes, it is extremely slow. It is also extremely old. But we use this stuff now. When you do multitasking on your phone now, what does it do? It zooms out into a card view. Does this look familiar to you? Keep in mind, this was going on like well over a decade ago, okay? They had this sort of functionality going on where you could switch back and forth between open applications. Again, the swipe at the bottom to switch apps. Does this seem familiar to you? Palm and the Palm Pre had this stuff first. They had it before anybody else. And they had this awesome keyboard down here. I used this thing to write on. At this point, I was doing some freelance writing about video games, and I would literally have press releases open and my WordPress app open, and I would jump between these two and write articles that way. Sometimes the press release simply needs to be turned into a 300-word article to kind of sum it up. I could do that on this device, and I would do this on this device. Of course, it did have its problems as well. Oreoing was one such issue where these two pieces would become sort of twistable like that. That was a problem. Of course, back then the camera wasn't anything too incredible either. The speaker wasn't much, but man, the functionality of that operating system is still something that modern phone OEMs are still taking things from to this day. Palm Pre, so far ahead of its time, definitely one of my top 5 phones of all time. For the next phone, it's hard to imagine a much larger leap in technology from the Palm Pre to the Galaxy Z Fold. This is the Fold 4 specifically, but if I'm being honest, the Fold 3, the Fold 4, the Fold 5, they're probably all going to be really, really similar for something like this. This just happens to be the Fold 4, the most recent Z Fold that I've owned, and it is one of the most feature-complete and polished devices I have ever owned. Yes, this cover display is more narrow and more tall. That's the big thing, tall, than I necessarily want it to be. But the tablet screen on the inside is just such a beautiful, such a useful screen to have. You can split screen multitask on it. You can rotate it, watch multimedia. Once I had something like this in my pocket, the ability to have a relatively small footprint in my pocket, but then pull it out and open it up into a full-fledged tablet. Once I had done this, I knew that my days of using a standard slab-style smartphone were absolutely in the past. I was never going to go back again. This phone and phones like this, phones that were non-traditional phones, absolutely broke me. I felt like the camera is wildly underrated. I've got some phenomenal shots on this thing. The speakers are fantastic as well, so the multimedia experience is really, really good. It's just a transformative device, and for me, no question at all, this is one of my favorite phones of all time. And it's one of the few on this list, maybe there's only one other one, that I would put my SIM back in right now if I had to, and I would not be unhappy about it. I would be able to cruise on with no problems at all. Before I tell you what the last phone is, let's take a look at some honorable mentions. The Pixel 2 XL stereo speakers, fantastic camera for its time. Really big screen that wasn't like the best screen in the world, a little bit grainy at times, but the software experience, the build quality of the camera, rear-mounted fingerprint scanner, unbelievably great phone for its time. Another phone that's really similar to this from the same era, the LG V30, ultra-wide camera, rear-mounted fingerprint scanner, a really big screen which had, like, for its time, teeny tiny little bitty bezels. You can see that, still small bezels even today. Gcam port to this thing made the camera even better. I loved using this device. What about, here's a weird one, the BlackBerry Key 1. I am a sucker for full QWERTY keyboards, physical keyboards, and this thing had a great one. Fingerprint scanner down there at the bottom. The camera was actually really underrated. I got some nice snaps with this thing. I love the build quality. I love the feel of this device. Shortcut key on the side, fantastic battery life. Really have to shout out the BlackBerry Key 1. I wish that we were still getting more devices like this today. It's not on the list, but I guess I should shout out the Unihertz phones because they are kind of similar. And guys, we got to wrap this thing up and end it with the phone that is currently in my pocket, the most recent phone on this list, Google's Pixel Fold. Now, I know some of you will be thinking, man, this thing just came out. How is it already in your top 5? And the answer is, I don't know. It's just absolutely perfect for me. The cover display is such a great size. It is so easily one-handable. It's not super tall. It's not super wide. It's just a great mini phone. And then it opens up to this tablet display, which I know some people are mad about certain apps not being optimized well for this, but most of the apps that I use work fantastically on this thing. And the other thing is, I use this thing to multitask all the time. Not as much as I did with my Surface Duo or Duo 2, but I multitask on this thing way more than I did on any other single screen device. This is unequivocally the closest thing that I have ever seen to the Surface Duo, but you don't have any of the downsides of the Surface Duo. The battery life's better. The camera is a lot better. The software in general is just smoother, more performant, fewer bugs, fewer glitches. And if you want to watch a video, you can full screen something and have no hinge down the middle. Now, with Duo, I was always just watching videos on one screen, putting it up in tent mode or something like that. But with this, obviously, you've got a full uninterrupted screen, but you do also have something like tent mode, so you don't need a kickstand, you don't need a stand at all. You're good to go with this thing. It's just such a great device. I've had almost no problems with it at all. It is so polished, and like I said, it just gets almost everything perfectly right for me. Now, this is subjective. This is my list. So you may really not like the Pixel Fold, but for me, this device fits like a glove, and that's why it has to already be in my top 5 of all time. So guys, there you go. Those are my top 5 phones of all time with some honorable mentions. I would love to hear from you down below. Did you own some of these phones? What were your thoughts on them? What is your top 5 of all time? You may notice some odd omissions from what people may have expected. For instance, no Windows phones. I didn't actually ever own any Windows phones. People think I'm a Microsoft fanboy, but I really only got into Microsoft with the Surface Duo, and as Surface Duo sails off into the sunset, I kind of just returned to the area that I came from, which was more just broad Android, and really, I've always been a pretty big fan of what Google does with their devices. So again, no Windows phones, no iPhones. Also, never have owned a single iPhone. I'm kind of weird in that regard, I guess, to a lot of people, but it is what it is. Like I said, drop your top 5 down below. I think that should be a fun conversation. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content like this. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.